Hello again, and welcome to the third and final video about the more theoretical approach to youth participation that we are developing in this video. So, in this short video, I will try not to be longer than 20 minutes. We are going to address three dimensions. The first and most important one that gives the background for the whole video is this difference between individual and collective engagement. What is that drives young people towards participation? Is just individual concerns to improve myself, to have a bigger salary in the future, jobs opportunity, or is more about being part of something bigger, participate in a collective struggle? So there is this tension in the way we conceive youth participation. What is the meaning of youth participation? Is it just individual or is collective? Then I will just say a few words about this idea of the entrepreneur of the self. Entrepreneur of the self is an expression that comes from the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who explored the changes in subjectivity throughout the 20th century, and as such, giving us very interesting concepts to understand the social construction of youth. Then I will talk a bit about the anxiety that we noticed during the Participates project concerning the participation in or the ways in which young people are participating, and then I will just explore some examples of what collective engagement could be. So, first is distinction between individual and collective engagement. There is this idea expressed recently by Georgia Gold. Georgia Gold is a young people herself. I mean, at the time she wrote her book, 2015, I think she was 26 years old. She's a young member of the Labour Party in the UK. And she has this very interesting sentence in her book that I will read. Many young people no longer express their political beliefs in collective movements, but in highly personal choices about how they live, where they work and consume. This move, according to the author, should be celebrated and encouraged as the starting point of a new empowered citizenship. So Georgia Gold, although she is a leftist from the Labour Party, she sees this move away from collective movements and more towards individualism. She sees that as a new empowered citizenship. But is this the case? Is the emphasis on improving ourselves in making change individually, in the way we work, in the way we consume, is this really what young people are moving towards? Or in a way they felt saturated by this kind of discourse and they are a bit tired of just improving themselves, but they want something more. They want this feeling of participating in a collective movement. This is something that we are going to discuss today. Well, but before that, I mean, this all move from collective to individual, I mean, has to do with what Beck and Bauman calls the process of individualization, which concerns the disembodying of institutional boundaries, drawing at the level of collectives, as in the past, and re-embedding of this boundary drawing at the level of people in the singular. So from collective engagements to individual work. An important feature of the process of individualization, of this process that we have been exploring, concerns the emphasis given to individual self-fulfillment, achievement, and responsibility. So the individual is the sole responsible for his or her own development. Within the individualization ethos, individuals tend to assume individual guilt for any failings, failing to get a job, for not being healthy, failing to pay his or her debts, failing to be competitive, failing in school, etc. Every time that the individual fails, he or she has no choice but to allocate the cause of that failure in themselves, because they were lazy, because they didn't work enough, etc., etc. This way, youth participation deepens neoliberal individualization, because it doesn't allow for a question of the whole system. All individual faults are to be blamed by the individual itself. There is not because there is a class structuring at work in society. There is not because there is discrimination, systemic discrimination. it's instead the fault of the individual. And this is the neoliberal logic at work that obfuscates structural inequalities because the focus of participation is on individualized responsibility and autonomy. No place for collective autonomy. Failure to succeed is not justified in terms of a deficit in public provision, but as a moral fault where individuals are responsible for their previous errors and self-indulgence. So very important, this issue. And it leads us to the notion of the entrepreneur of the self. This idea that I myself, I am a commodity. I am a commodity that needs to be improved. Thus the notion of long life learning that we are learning, that we need to learn throughout all our lives to improve ourselves, to make ourselves valuable in the labor market, to be competitive, etc., etc. Concerns, so this notion, just to sum up in a way that becomes more accessible, the entrepreneur of the self concerns the self-governing that individuals deploy on themselves. Self-government is the individual governing itself, no longer the need for an extra identity like the monarchy or the state governing individuals, but the individual starts to self-governing itself. Very important notion from Foucault, this self-governing. By constantly being pressured to optimize their capacities, skills, emotions, health, bodies. Remember the explosion on gyms, for instance, the emphasis of having a very nice muscular body, the issues of health, all the concerns with health that we have today, from diets to exercise, etc. So this is all about learning to improve ourselves. Within this logic, the self is seen as an investment. We are investing in ourselves to be later paid back through a salary, through relationships, etc., etc. This posits the ongoing interest in youth as part of a larger modern trend of objectifying the self, as if ourselves we were an object that needs to be worked out, improved, where individuals are addressed as commodities that need to constantly seek for self-realization, self-improvement, and self-perfection. So this is the ethos of the entrepreneur of the self. Young people are expected, young people live in the same world as adults do, so they also feel the impact of these ideologies, of these discourses. Sorry about the mistake, young. People are expected to experiment different identities, improve themselves constantly by following routines and lifestyles. Look on how much packed is the daily life of a young person. He has, of course, the school, but then he has all these extracurricular activities like learning music, participating in sports, this pressure to be constantly active, doing something. It is as if we are afraid that if young people if they just relax and don't do nothing, that can be dangerous. So there is, again, like we mentioned in the previous lecture, this propensity to occupy young people, following lifestyles, etc., etc. And this, of course, generates anxiety. This constant pressure to optimize ourselves, to look good at the eyes of others, to fulfill social expectations, cultural expectations, to have a certain kind of body, to look in a certain way. This affects not only women, but also men, issues about so-called hypermasculinity, the pressure on men to perform according to these ideals of what it means to be a male. All these expectations, social pressures to improve ourselves, to be certain identities, are a cause of anxiety. So it's not as emancipatory as gold in the first slide that I show seems to understand. This focus this shift from collective to individual can create anxiety. And this was one of the most interesting results from the Party Space project. We realized that the overabundance of opportunities that young people reveal in cities such as Frankfurt, Gothenburg, and Zurich, these were some of the most affluent cities that we studied in our Party Space project. where young people have all the opportunities to participate without barely any obstacles. There is an overabundance of opportunities. This is reported to lead to an identity uncertainty. As if they have too many things to do, they cannot decide what to do. They felt lost, overwhelmed by all the opportunities. With young people experimenting many different identities without never feeling at home or satisfied, always shifting their interests without taking them to an end. When you have many things to do, many identities to experiment, you can easily feel lost because then you ended up not being nothing. You never go in depth into nothing. You just jump from one thing to another. You become superficial. They complain, young people, about the constant pressure to be active, improving themselves through engagement with extra school activities, participation through consumption, and regret the lack of time for just chill out and do nothing. The constant pressure to be active, to experiment different identities, and to optimize themselves, instead of leading towards a new empowered citizenship, as Gold taught, results in boredom, anxiety, lack of perseverance, and lack of commitment. So, this overwhelming presence of opportunities to participate ends up having the exact opposite effect. Lack of perseverance, lack of commitment, a kind of loss of the meaning of life.